Viewer discretion is advised.
Boom, perfect timing.
Police brutality is the use of excessive and/or unnecessary force by police. Historically, in the United States, police brutality has been a component of many major political and social movements. Demonstrations surrounding the civil rights movement of the 1960s, anti-war protests, the war on drugs, and the global war on terrorism have all involved claims of excessive force by police. In the modern-day US, many videos of police brutality in the form of police shootings have been caught on camera and shared widely via social media. This has led to the creation of the Black Lives Matter movement and the claim that American police disproportionately use excessive force against or kill more unarmed black people than white people. Because the FBI does not keep complete data on police shootings by race, the claim is sharply debated. Some have argued that American police are selectively biased against black Americans, while others say there's no statistical basis for that claim, and that disproportionate attention is given to cases involving black Americans. A statistical analysis done by Roland G. Fryer, a black economics professor at Harvard University, found that black men and women are more likely to be touched, handcuffed, pushed to the ground, or pepper sprayed by a police officer, even after accounting for how, where, and when they encounter the police. But the study found no racial bias in police shootings. So while some have argued that police brutality is a serious issue predominantly affecting black Americans that should lead to reforms in American law enforcement, others have argued that police brutality is more contextually complex and/or that there is not sufficient evidence to conclude it is racially biased or motivated. Daniel Shaver, a 26-year-old pest control worker and resident of Granbury, Texas, had been staying at a Mesa La Quinta Inn and Suites on business. He invited two acquaintances, Monique Portillo and Luis Nunez, to his room for drinks. There he showed them a scoped air rifle he was using to exterminate birds inside grocery stores. At one point, the gun was pointed outside his fifth-floor window, prompting a witness to notify the hotel receptionist. The police were immediately called.
911 emergency.
Hi, I'm with the La Quinta at 6530 East Superstition Springs Boulevard. And a couple of the guests have come to me. I'm an employee here. They come to me and they told me that somebody's pointing a rifle outside of one of the windows in our building.
Okay, and this is the 6530 East Superstition Springs Boulevard in Mesa?
Yes, it is.
Do we know what he's pointing it at? Do we know what he's pointing the gun at?
We're not sure. They're saying fourth floor.
Okay, one moment here.
That blue one right there?
Okay, so what is his name?
I have to double check and make sure, because, you know. Yeah. That's definitely 502. Okay, his name. Let me sign in to my computer right now. Yeah, Daniel Shaver.
Officer Philip Brilsford, a Mesa police officer, and several other Mesa police officers responded to the emergency call. When police arrived at the hotel, they ordered Mr. Shaver and Mrs. Portillo to exit the room. 6 officers in the hotel corridor pointed weapons at them and gave them orders for several minutes with frequent warnings that failing to comply with them would get them shot.
Occupants of room 502, this is the Mesa Police. Listen to my instructions. I want the female to step out.
A police sergeant, Sergeant Charles Langley, instructed them to lie face down on the hallway carpet, which they did. As instructed by the sergeant, Mrs. Portillo crawls towards the police officers. An officer grabs her and pulls her behind the other officers, leaving Daniel Shaver lying face down in the hallway.
Stop right there! Stop! Stop! Get on the ground, both of you! Lay down on the ground! Lay down on the ground! If you make a mistake, another mistake, there's a very severe possibility you're both going to get shot. Do you understand that?
Yes.
I do.
Yes.
All right.
What the?
Shut up. I'm not here to be tactful and diplomatic with you. You listen, you obey. For one thing, did I tell you to move, young man? Did I tell you to
No, sir. No,
put
sir.
both
No,
your
sir.
hands,
No, sir. No, sir.
put both your hands on the top of your head and interlace your fingers. Take your feet and cross your left foot over your right foot. Young man, you are not to move. You're to put your eyes down and look down at the carpet. You're to keep your fingers interlaced behind your head. You're to keep your feet crossed. If you move, we're going to consider that a threat, and we are going to deal with it, and you may not survive it. Do you understand me?
Yes, sir.
Young lady, shut up and listen. All right? You are to keep your feet crossed. Take both of your hands, put them flat in front of you. You are to push yourself up to a kneeling position. Kneeling position. Now, put both your hands in the air. Okay, crawl towards us.
I'm so sorry.
Okay. Stop. Okay. Cuff, grab and pull.
No, Rich, pull
Pull,
him this
Rich,
way.
Pull. Let me know when you're clear. Clear? No, you're not clear. You haven't frisked her yet.
You're not. You'll be in the chain till we figure out exactly what's going on, okay? Just be cool and we'll be done.
Okay, when you're done with that, lay her flat.
Sergeant Langley would then instruct Daniel Shaver to get on his knees and crawl towards the officers. The sergeant warned Mr. Shaver that if he did not comply, there was a very severe possibility that he was going to get shot. As Mr. Shaver crawled towards the officers, he abruptly put his right hand behind his back, and at that very moment, Officer Philip Brailsford shot and killed Daniel Shaver.
Okay, young man, listen to my instructions and do not make a mistake. You are to keep your legs crossed. Do you understand me?
Yes, sir.
You are to put both of your hands palm down, straight out in front of you. Push yourself up to a kneeling position. I said keep your legs crossed!
I'm sorry. I just pushed
I didn't say this in conversation. Hands in the air! Hands up in the air! You do that again, we're shooting you. Do you understand?
Please do not shoot me.
Then listen to my instructions.
I'm trying to just do what you
Don't talk! Listen! Hands straight up in the air. Do not put your hands down for any reason. You think you're going to fall, you better fall on your face. Your hands go back in the small of your back or down. We are going to shoot you. Do you understand me?
Yes, sir.
Crawl towards me. Crawl towards me!
Yes, sir.
Don't go! Get up on him. Okay, hold on him. One with me. 998. Hold on. They gave me 2 key cards.
Stay quiet. You got him on the door here? Yeah.
Pull her and get her out of here.
These fucking
Okay,
key cards ain't
hold on it. Okay, I need one up with me. One up with me. Come on, you guys, get up with me. Take this place, holding the door. Okay. Okay, secure your weapon. Secure your weapon.
Secured.
Okay, go. You're out. Sam, anyone?
Daniel Shaver's widow, Laney Sweet, filed a wrongful death lawsuit against the Mesa Police Department. The notice of claim asked for $35 million and said police used excessive force when dealing with Daniel Shaver. In early March of 2016, the Maricopa County Attorney's Office announced it would pursue second-degree murder charges against Philip Brailsford in relation to the incident. According to a statement by the county attorney, quote, "After carefully reviewing the relevant facts and circumstances, we have determined that the use of deadly physical force was not justified in this instance," end quote.
Brand new details just coming in on that case we brought you at the top of our newscast. A Mesa police officer charged with second-degree murder for a shooting back in January. And this statement just coming in from his family. On behalf of her 2 young daughters, the victim, Laney Sweet, wants everyone to know her husband, Daniel Shaver, was a wonderful and devoted husband and father. He was a kind, loving, and peaceful human being. His tragic and senseless murder has caused irreparable devastation to all their lives. Today's announcement of second-degree murder charges against Mesa Police Officer Brailsford is the first step towards justice for Daniel and his family. We commend Maricopa County Attorney Bill Montgomery for his decision to bring these criminal charges, and we fully expect justice will be served.
Philip Brailsford pleaded not guilty. Later that month, the Mesa Police Department fired Philip Brailsford, citing several policy violations and unsatisfactory performance. An internal investigation report revealed that Mr. Brailsford had violated department weapon policy by engraving his patrol rifle with the phrases "you're fucked" and "Malone Labe," a Greek expression meaning "come and take them." Mr. Brailsford had also previously been investigated for body slamming a teenager during an arrest. Philip Brailsford faced up to 25 years in prison if found guilty of second-degree murder.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Would you tell us your name, please?
My name is Detective Paul Sipe, S-I-P-E.
Detective Paul Sipe was the one who headed the investigation into the Daniel Shaver shooting. When asked by the Deputy Maricopa County Attorney Susie Charbel regarding the inconsistencies in his investigation, Detective Sipe would testify that all 5 police reports omitted crucial information pertinent to the case. Although Detective Sipe did not explicitly state the nature of the information or the discrepancies, the prosecuting attorney noted several times during the trial that the officers present at the scene failed to include in the reports that Mr. Shaver had pleaded and sobbed for his life before being shot by Officer Brailsford 5 times.
First page of the autopsy report, does it show that the individual was shot and that's what killed him?
Yes, the cause of death was listed as multiple gunshot wounds.
All right. Could you tell us from looking at that front page where the shots were?
The first one is a gunshot wound of the back. The second paragraph is gunshot wound of the neck. The third paragraph is gunshot wound of the face. The fourth paragraph is gunshot wound of the chest, and the fifth paragraph is headed gunshot wound of the right lower extremity.
Okay. At the end of that report, is there a toxicology result, one pager that just
Yes.
has the results? Could
Yes,
you look
there
at that? Could you look at that, please? Sorry. What, if anything, is reported on there for toxicological results?
From a vitreous test, an ethyl alcohol level of 0.29, and from left chest blood, an ethyl alcohol level of 0.27.
Who did you interview first?
The first person I interviewed was Monique Portillo.
And what was the reason behind interviewing Monique?
Monique was in the room with Mr. Shaver when officers went up to contact them.
How long was your interview with her approximately?
Just going from memory, I would say 10, maybe 15 minutes.
All right. Where did you interview her?
I interviewed her. We had a police vehicle in the parking lot, and she was in the vehicle.
How many people were in the room when the rifle was being handled?
3.
All right. And that would be herself, Mr. Shaver, and...
There was a third person, Luis, I believe his last name was Nunez.
You know, as you're watching this video, did you see Mr. Shaver at any point make any threatening gestures towards the officers?
To that point?
Right.
No.
All right. As he's being told things, is he refusing, is he saying, I'm not going to do this and that?
No.
Is he screaming at them or speaking loudly at the officers?
No.
Was he cursing at them or saying, threatening things to them?
No.
Okay, nothing like, you know, I'm going to kill you or, you know, I'm going to get you guys or any of that nature?
No.
Did he appear to be upset, angry?
No.
All right. At some point, did he start crying?
Yes.
All right. Did he plead with the officers not to kill him? Did he say, please don't shoot me, please don't shoot?
Yes, he did.
Was Mr. Shaver doing or saying anything towards the officers that would have caused them to believe that he was going to lunge at them?
No.
Did he did he have anything in his hands that you can see?
No.
So now you have seen the video. Did you then just want to interview the defendant?
Yes.
All right, and is that protocol in an officer-involved shooting? Yes. Okay. Did he watch the video before you interviewed him? Just him? I mean,
there were other officers present, but he did watch the video with his attorney.
Oh, okay. So he was able to watch it without you looking over his shoulder, for lack of a better word. You were not sitting there with him watching it, correct?
I was in the room, but I was not where I could see the video, no.
Okay. If you could summarize to us what he told you about the incident.
Officer Brailsford told me that when he arrived on scene, he was responding to an emergency call of a person with a gun.
And did he mention at that point feeling threatened or scared of Mr. Shaver as Mr. Shaver and Ms. Portillo came out of the room?
He said that there were several moments, or at least 2 moments, where he was terrified, that he did feel threatened by the movement that Mr. Shaver made right before he fired.
Did he happen to mention to you that Mr. Shaver was crying and asking not to be shot?
No, he did not.
Are you familiar with the term contact cover, that principle?
Yes.
That's a common term with police officers?
Yes, it is.
And so in this particular case, if we were to use that term, Sergeant Langley would be the contact officer and the other officers would have been the cover officers?
Yes.
And that means that the contact officer is the one that's going to be the speaking officer?
That's correct.
And if you view the video, it's pretty clear that that was Sergeant Langley, because at times he speaks very loudly.
Yes.
And the other officers are the cover officers.
That's correct.
And that was the duty of Officer Brailsford.
Yes.
And the duty of cover officers is to provide cover. One of the duties of a cover officer is to provide cover for the team.
That's correct.
In other words, he's there to protect himself and the other officers.
Yes.
And he's also there to protect the public.
Yes.
In this particular case, they were there with the known information that there was a suspect in room 502 with a rifle.
Yes.
It turns out later that it is an air rifle, and people may think that that may be innocuous, but whether it is or it isn't, they don't know that, correct?
That's correct.
All they know is a suspect in a room with a rifle.
Yes.
And officers generally think where there's one gun, there are other guns, right?
Yes.
And where there's a rifle, there are probably handguns, right?
Yes.
That's what you are taught.
That's correct.
And if you don't think that way, you end up sorry, right?
Yes.
When you were asked about the protocol, about how suspects are asked to approach, are there different ways to have a suspect approach when there's officers there ordering them to approach?
Yes.
Could you give us one of those examples?
One example would be if it's what you perceive to be a threatening situation. You might have someone standing. You would have them reach behind their back and grab the top part of their T-shirt or shirt and lift it up so that you can see their waistband. You would then have them circle 360 degrees and stop so that they're facing away from you. You would then have them place their hands either above their head or out to their side and walk backwards towards your voice.
All right. So, so there's more than one way to have a suspect approach you, correct?
Yes.
All right. And in fact, if you had them standing there with their back turned towards you, if someone was to come out from another room, they would actually be a barrier. Is that correct? They could be?
Theoretically, yes.
All right. So they could be standing between you and the person who may jump out of the room, out of the blue, correct?
Yes.
Compared to having the person down on their knees, sitting up and laying down, put your arms out, put your arms back, etc.
Yes.
Okay. If you don't mind showing us, if that's all right, Judge, if you could show us when Mr. Shaver first put his hands behind his back, what that looked like.
When he first put his hands behind his back, he was on his knees. He had his hands up like this, and he brought them back like this.
All right. Did he not, in fact, bend over at the waist?
There might have been a slight bend. I would have to review the video for that specific movement, but.
So if a suspect was to have him up and behind his back, would it make sense for him to bend down and use both of his hands to grab one weapon?
It's possible, but it didn't appear to me to be a weapon drawing motion.
What did it look like to you?
In my experience, what I usually see is when I'm giving someone a command and they're not comprehending the command, such as if I tell someone to put their hands on the car or put your hands on your head, and because for whatever reason they think you're going to handcuff them, so I call it the handcuffing move.
Is that what it looked like to you?
Yes.
That he was getting ready to be handcuffed?
Yes.
The court, based on the totality of the circumstances and the evidence presented, does find that probable cause exists to believe that the crime was committed and that the defendant committed it as charged in the indictment. Mr. Martin, at this point, the defendant has the opportunity to make a specific offer of proof. Do you wish to do that at this time?
I do, Your Honor.
You may proceed.
The first witness that we would make an offer of proof would be Sergeant Langley, which would be, we would suggest, especially significant given my colleague's redirect examination of Detective Syed, because in addition to the things I mentioned in just a minute, as you know, Sergeant Langley was the sergeant in charge of this operation on January 18th. He would testify that Officer Brailsford did his job, he did his assignment, and he protected the team and did what he was supposed to do.
The facts in this case are a little bit unique because the issue isn't whether or not the defendant caused the death of the victim. There is no dispute that he caused the death of the victim. The question is really his state of mind and whether or not there is any legal justification to his actions. As to Sergeant Langley, I will allow the defense to put on that witness as an offer of proof. So, Mr. Marins, are you prepared to proceed at this time?
I am.
All right, you may call your witness.
State your name, please.
My name is Charles J. Langley.
You were previously employed by whom?
I was previously employed by the Mesa Police Department.
But you have since retired?
Yes, I have. I was assigned as a patrol sergeant. The emergency traffic call came out of an individual with a rifle, pointing the rifle out of a fifth-floor hotel room at the La Quinta Inn.
And what did you do in response to that call, sir?
Responded there, lights and siren. When I arrived, Officer Gomez was there, and there was also an adult female that was outside that identified herself to me as being a manager, I believe. She stated to me that two of her guests and an employee had stated that there was a subject with a rifle in room 502, as I recall, and that the two guests stated he had been pointing the rifle out the window. Female and the male come out. I instructed them to lay down and prone out on the floor with their arms extended out in front of them, hands extended out in front of them, and to cross their legs. But I got them both proned out, hands out in front of them, legs crossed. Then gave the female instructions that to come up, push herself up to a kneeling position, put her hands straight up in the air, and crawl towards us on her knees.
And did you have the female then crawl towards you?
Yes.
Detective Sipe has told us he'd never seen or rarely seen this type of protocol. Why did you use this type of protocol?
Well, the geography, as I mentioned before, provides some difficulties, and the fact that they didn't come out the way they've been instructed to. Instead of dealing with one person, I now had two people out. One was potentially a suspect who could be armed, and I didn't know if I had anybody else still inside that hotel room. If I had asked them, say, for instance, to stand up and to walk towards me, what it would have done then is it would have potentially blocked the view of the doorway to that room. In other words, we want to be able to see above them if anybody else came out behind them. Start giving verbal commands to the gentleman. I wanted to keep things as simple as possible, and also he already had a template, a role model of instructions that had been given to the female. I tried to give those instructions to him so that it would be the same. Instructed him to come up to his knees and put his hands up in the air. He came up to his knees, and as I recall, he started to put both hands behind his back.
And what did that tell you? What did you take that to mean?
I took that as
feel about that?
One, I knew that he was not following instructions, and there was a possibility that he may have been trying to bring a weapon into play.
Detective Sipe told us earlier that it looked to him like he was putting his hands behind his back to be handcuffed. Is that how you perceived it?
No. Number one, he was not in proximity to us to be handcuffed, so I don't know why. No, I can't put myself into his mind, so I don't know why he would think that that would be an appropriate place for him to come up to put his hands behind his back for handcuffing. Also, that didn't follow the instructions that I had given him.
What did you perceive that action to be?
At that point, realized maybe he just doesn't understand. We had distance at that time, so I felt that he had made a mistake. Right? So I reaffirmed the verbal instructions to him. As I recall, he affirmed that he understood. Told them that he was to keep his hands up in the air and start crawling towards us.
And what happened next?
He started crawling towards us, and he's crawling towards us. We're watching him. Officer Brilsford was in a kneeling position directly to my front. Officer Elmore was to my left on the north side. As the gentleman crawled towards us, he comes up and he abruptly starts putting his right hand behind him, almost like in what I thought was a drawing position, like he was drawing a weapon.
And what did you do?
At that time, my instinct was, it just reverberated in my brain. I said, I was thinking.
I'm sorry, what?
It was instinct, just experience, training. I looked at him and I just thought, gun. I remember that at that point, I thought that we were going to get shot. I thought I was going to get shot. I thought, I was yelling at him. I had my rifle Pistol grip of my rifle was in my right hand. Barrel was pointed down because I was directly behind Officer Brailsford, who was kneeling. I'm thinking to myself, gun. I'm starting to yell. My thumb is on the selector switch of my rifle, and I'm starting to pull my rifle up and manipulate the selector switch when I realized, and this is all happening, I guess, in thousandths of a second, that I can't make the shot because Officer Brilsford is directly in front of me.
Mesa Police Sergeant Charles Langley, the officer who is in charge of the team who confronted Daniel Shaver and had been yelling out the conflicting commands, also testified that he would have shot Mr. Shaver too if it weren't for Philip Brailsford being in front of him. Mr. Langley continued that if he had fired his rifle, he would have seriously injured or killed Mr. Brailsford. He said that he was worried Mr. Shaver had been reaching for a gun when he put his hands behind his back and later raised his right hand.
Officer Brilsford is kneeling in front of me. In order to make the shot, I'd have to bring up my barrel up over his head, lean forward and punch forward, get my barrel past his head so that if he did come up, I didn't shoot him in the back of the head. Also, I have a short-barreled rifle, and at that proximity, just the muzzle blast could have killed or seriously injured him. So I couldn't make the shot.
And is that the only reason you didn't?
Yes, otherwise I would have shot. Officer Brailsford engages him. The gentleman goes down. At that time, knew that the gentleman was down. I still had a hallway that the team had to clear and a room that I wanted to move on and see if we could at least secure the doorway of that.
Is what Officer Brailsford did appropriate?
I believed at the time, and I believe now, that he was protecting the team. I mean, that was his job, was to make sure that we weren't killed or seriously injured.
Now, before I get into the trial, I think context is extremely important. During this time, the contents of the body camera footage that you just saw had only been described to the public before when Philip Brailsford was first charged, but the video itself was withheld from the public throughout the proceedings of this case. Just something to keep in mind because I'll be coming back to this. Philip Brailsford would eventually take the stand in his own defense and explained why he shot Daniel Shaver. According to Mr. Brailsford, from his point of view, it looked like Daniel Shaver was reaching for a weapon while he was on his knees crawling toward Mesa Police in that hotel hallway. During further testimony, Mr. Brailsford would say, quote, "If this situation happened exactly as it did that time, I would have done the same thing. I believed 100% that he was reaching for a gun."
Thank you, Judge. Mr. Brailsford, you have testified as a police officer before, correct?
I have.
How many times have you done that?
I don't know an exact number, ma'am.
Right. One time, 2 times, 3 times?
Several times.
More than 5? Less than 10?
I'm not sure, ma'am.
I'm noticing you're having some trouble with your memory. Do you always have problems remembering things? Now, your testimony yesterday was that this particular call was a very high-stress situation, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Right. And it was considered, or you considered it, a high-threat level, correct?
That is correct.
Right. Now, your fellow officers were cracking jokes about barking like a dog, were they not, during this threat call there?
I believe I remember hearing that, but I didn't think it was funny and I didn't laugh and I certainly didn't make the joke.
You said yesterday that you have not talked to your dad about what happened that night, correct?
What do you mean now?
You said yesterday that you have not talked to your dad about what happened that night, the night of the shooting. Is that correct?
I guess what I'm trying to say is, what do you, I don't understand what you're referencing.
Oh, you don't?
What
Yesterday, you said you did not talk to your dad about what happened on that night. Is that true?
During what time, ma'am?
The night of the shooting.
No, I did not talk with my dad during that night.
Why didn't you talk to him that night?
I was still completely in shock and disbelief, and I was at a loss for words.
Do you, have you talked to him about the trial and this case since that night?
My father and I have certainly spoken about this case. It's very serious.
Does he, has he given you any instructions about what to say during trial or your demeanor or anything?
No, certainly not, ma'am.
Why did you say you perceived Mr. Shaver was armed?
That's how I'm trained, ma'am. In a gun call, in a situation as this, I have to presume he's armed until I can physically prove otherwise.
Okay. And you are trained that if you perceive someone is armed on a call like that and they move their elbow, then your training, your testimony is that your training allows you to fire at that person, correct?
It all depends on the totality of the circumstance.
Great. Could you explain to us the totality of the circumstances in this case that caused you to fire?
Absolutely, ma'am. It started right from the beginning, receiving the emergency call, having many officers respond to the scene of La Quinta, where there was a man with a gun in an elevated location, in a highly populated location. And from there, Sergeant Langley formed an immediate action team at that point. We wouldn't just form something like that if it was simply someone smoking marijuana in their hotel room. It was a very serious situation. It was potentially an active shooter.
Okay. That's the totality of the circumstances?
That's part of it.
Okay. What's the rest of it?
If you'd like me to proceed through the rest of what happened, I can tell you exactly that.
Oh, no, I'm not asking you what happened. What I'm asking is you mentioned the word totality of the circumstances 5-6 different times yesterday, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So what are the totality of the circumstances that caused you to fire? Let me give you an example. Yesterday, Mr. Jacobs mentioned what a totality of the circumstance he trains you guys on, right?
Yes.
It's the pertinent objective facts.
Yes.
Where's the pertinent objective facts in this case?
The pertinent objective facts are that we're responding to the scene of a man with a gun.
That's the only fact that you think is pertinent?
There's many facts that happened, ma'am.
Like what?
He reached behind his back when he wasn't supposed to several times. He was ordered by Sergeant Langley and warned what would happen if he did reach behind his back. Moments before the actual shooting, he was asked if he was drunk, to which he replied that he wasn't. He was asked on multiple occasions if he understood Sergeant Langley's commands, and he replied that he did.
Do you, in the 2 years you worked with the Mesa Police Department, did you have the opportunity to interact with people who are intoxicated?
Yes.
Okay. And do they normally tell you the truth about the fact that they're intoxicated?
Not all the time.
Could you explain to us how there was an imminent threat from Daniel when you didn't see or know for sure if he had a gun?
So based on the totality of the circumstances, the reason why we're going to the call in the first place, we have a man with a gun in an elevated position. We have to secure the scene. We have to make things safe.
Okay, so my question was, how was there an imminent threat, meaning the moment before an assault occurs from Daniel when you didn't see or know if he had a gun?
When Mr. Shaver was reaching towards his waistline, which appeared to me reaching for a gun, that is the imminent use of force, of deadly force.
When you were in the hallway that night, the hallway where this occurred, and you were shown some pictures of the camera that was attached to the right side of your eyepiece.
Yes.
Was your actual vision of what you're seeing a little bit different than the eyepiece?
Yes, so as we know, the camera is mounted on the bridge of my glasses to the right, so the camera is only going to be able to see whatever field of vision that the camera has, as wide as the lens goes. I still have, my left eye and my right eye, I can still see all of this other stuff going on. My field of view is much larger than 5.5 feet in this hallway.
Philip Brailsford's defense team begins its case by suggesting that the body cam footage was not accurately portraying the complete hallway because it was not positioned in the center of his chest. Instead, it was positioned on the right side of his eyepiece.
Do you know why you were assigned to wear an Axon body camera and some other officers perhaps were not? If you know, but I don't want you to guess.
I was assigned an Axon body camera because it was a pilot program about the time I was going through the academy, and so it was assigned to all of the new recruits of that class, and they simply did not have the funding for all of the other officers to carry cameras at that time.
All right, thank you.
Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
Would you state your name or introduce yourself to the jury and spell your last name for us?
Timothy T. Williams, Jr., Timothy, Williams, Williams.
And what do you do for a living, Mr. Williams?
Timothy Williams takes the stand for the prosecution. He is identified as a police procedure and use of force expert.
And so are the officers taught that during the training, is that the objective is usually to de-escalate a situation?
You get that from the academy until the day you retire through continuing education. De-escalation is the mantra of dealing with these types of situations.
De-escalation tactics is an essential tool for all police officers and is often portrayed as the singular answer to reducing police use of force. De-escalation is particularly applicable to persons in crisis situations with limited risks. This question alone raises a significant issue as it underscores the failure of the Mesa police officers to engage in de-escalation tactics during their response to the call, ultimately leading to a tragic outcome.
Let's say, for instance, in one of the simulations, you have a person who pops up who has a gun up to their side, like in their hand, but dangling towards their leg. Is the officer supposed to fire immediately when he sees a weapon?
No, what you have is a threat, an imminent threat. If a person has a gun and you have that all the time out in the field, well, not all the time, but a lot of times. If you see a person with a gun in their hand and it's a threat but not an imminent threat, you'll be shooting people that you ought not to be shooting. That's why you train, when you see that, you train, tell the person, drop the gun. Drop the gun. Give a person a chance to comply to the commands. A lot of time, it's been my experience when I was out there in the field, the person dropped the gun.
Are officers taught what the training is for perception versus identification of a threat and how to respond to it?
Yes, that's why you have your situation simulations. That's why you have training. Some agents say shoot, don't shoot, type of scenarios. And it's constantly reinforced throughout your career.
Are officers taught also to look at the totality of the circumstances of the situation when assessing a threat?
Yes, it's drilled into you about being tunnel vision, not to be tunnel vision when you go into these situations, but to look at the totality of everything that's being presented and to take all that into evaluation.
Okay. Are they taught also to use their common sense as well as their training, or only their training?
Well, training and common sense comes into play. Maturity comes into play. Go ahead.
Sorry. Are officers taught that absent anything more, they can shoot an unarmed citizen for making a furtive movement on a man with a weapon call?
No. You weren't. That's not the training I received. It's not the training law enforcement received. You got to. Individual reach for his waistband and they may be pulling the pants up. You want to shoot him for that? No, you've got to be able to articulate. There's got to be an imminent threat, and that's where training comes in. You have all these scenarios, hypothetical scenarios, if you will, and you run through the gamut through your whole career, so that you can make the proper intelligent decisions when you're out there in the field, so that you can know what's a threat and what's, as you say, furtive movements and so on and so forth.
The prosecution asks Mr. Williams to describe what he saw on the body cam footage.
Well, the first thing I noticed is a couple things. When the decedent came out of the room, I noticed that it appeared to me that he was appeared to be inebriated. The second thing I noticed that his pants were very low, below his knees, and so these are things that I noticed as they came out. And the reason why that's important, because certain things transpired after by commands by Sergeant Langley that he was doing, and that was important as to what additional observations that could be made as the situation continued.
What was it about, you called him the decedent, but what was it about Mr. Shaver that made you believe that he was inebriated as soon as he came out of the room?
And again, it's my background education experience. I've seen a lot of this before, and doing this up and going on 44 years. I think I have a little expertise in that area. It's just the coordination wasn't as sharp as a person who was not under the influence or inebriated. And when he was even doing what he was asked to do, it was he was responding, but it wasn't as though a person that was sober doing it.
Jury could decide whether a former Mesa cop should go to prison for murder. The 12 men and women got the case tonight after those closing arguments. Philip Brailsford was on duty when he shot and killed Daniel Shaver. It happened in a Mesa hotel in 2016. On the stand, Brailsford said Shaver appeared to reach for a gun, but the prosecutor told the jury that threat was overblown.
A police officer does not get to execute a begging, crying, unarmed citizen because he supposes without proof that he has some hidden handgun.
You're in a no-win situation, and you got to do it make a decision in 1 second. And once you make that decision, there's no turning back.
The jury duly impaneled and sworn in the above entitled action, and upon our oaths, do find the defendant Philip Mitchell Brailsford on the charge of count 1, second-degree murder, not guilty.
After a 6-week trial, a jury found Philip Brailsford not guilty of second-degree murder and also found him not guilty of a lesser charge of reckless manslaughter. The body cam video of Daniel Shaver's death would finally be released after the jury acquitted ex-Mesa police officer Philip Brailsford of murder.
Joining us on the phone, I have Mark Garagos, criminal defense attorney. Mark, you are representing Daniel's widow. What else can you tell us about that night?
I can tell you that based on the transcript of the audio, that the Daniel, prior to being assassinated, because there's no other term for it, was pleading for his life. Please don't kill me. Please don't kill me. He was on the ground. He had his arms out in front of him, pleading, crying, and next thing you know, as he's apparently, one officer says, trying to pull up his pants because they've got him crawling on the ground, he's shot in the back of the neck, through the heart, through the arm, through the leg, 5 times with an AR-15 that's inscribed with some rather rude language in it. Nobody else fired, just the one officer, the one who's now charged with murder, who's been held to answer. I attended his preliminary hearing last week and listened to it, and it's very difficult to listen to. My belief is that the reason that you don't see anything on this tape is because if you did see what happened, you'd realize, and I think it's fair to say the reason that the district attorney charged murder in this case is that there was absolutely no provocation whatsoever.
Did you see the video that I posted of the guy that got gunned down the hallway?
I
in
didn't watch
Arizona?
it. Dude, I did
Can't
see
watch
that.
it. So horrific.
Unbelievable.
It's murder.
It was murder. And also, why do you have to crawl across the fucking floor? How
Because
about you put your hands over your head and we come over and cuff you?
Because they wanted to clear the room. He was near the room. They didn't want him to be too close to the room. The room was slightly around the corner. But the way the guy escalated it, was playing a game of Simon Says with them, and then gunned this guy down.
Shut the fuck up!
Like, what are you doing? I will fucking shoot you.
Yeah.
And then did shoot him for just reaching back to grab his pants as his pants were falling down as he was crawling. Yeah. I mean, he in no way looked like he was doing something dangerous. But the most fucking disturbing thing was how many people in the comments after I posted that video on Twitter were saying, that he didn't comply. They were like saying, clean kill. You know what,
that's
man?
a guy who got beat up a lot in high school.
And there's that old expression that if you give someone a hammer, everything looks like a nail.
Yeah.
If that's the only tool you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And you're giving this young guy who's obviously fucking psycho. I mean, the way he gunned that guy down, I mean, that was insane. Just fucking insane.
It took
people watching my husband die, a very horrible, inhumane death for people to care. It was an execution. You had a man begging for his life, and he was shot 5 times for what? For his elbow coming up too high? For being confused? For being compliant? Why did he deserve to die? He didn't. Just don't understand how anybody could watch that video and then say not guilty, that this is justified, that Daniel deserved this, and that Philip Brilsford doesn't deserve to be held accountable for his actions.
The jury that acquitted Philip Brailsford did not hear about the 2 words that were on his dust cover because the judge excluded that evidence. Mr. Brailsford shot Mr. Shaver with a personal AR-15 rifle, which he was allowed to use, according to police reports. And as I mentioned previously, the gun was inscribed with the phrase, "You're fucked." The inscription on the gun was a violation of department policy, which was one of the reasons Mr. Brailsford was fired. Now for Charles Langley, like I said before, he was the one shouting the conflicting commands and escalating the situation in the video footage. And while looking into Mr. Langley's past, according to news reports, he was disciplined back in 2010 for bad behavior. Internal Affairs reprimanded him for personal behavior, conduct, and attitude towards coworkers and superiors, defaming or discrediting coworkers, and most significantly, failure to lead subordinates consistent with the mission and vision of the Mesa Police Department. This, according to police documents. He was ordered to improve his work ethic and required to take training courses, and if he did not get better, he was threatened with termination. Charles Langley retired in April of 2016, just 4 months after Daniel Shaver's death, and then abruptly moved to the Philippines. Daniel Shaver is survived by his 2 young daughters and his wife, Lainey Sweet. It was later revealed that on August 21st, 2018, just 2 years after shooting an unarmed Daniel Shaver, former police officer Philip Mitch Brailsford had been quietly rehired by the city of Mesa in order to obtain a special pension. Mr. Brailsford had appealed his termination and signed an agreement with the Mesa City Manager's office to allow him to apply for an accidental disability pension and medical retirement. This meant that he was rehired temporarily, but could not perform any job duties or receive payment.
His termination was undone and he was allowed to come back with no pay in order to get this done.
He was eligible for retirement benefits, so he applied for them.
But he was made available for retirement benefits because the city then agreed to allow him to come back to work.
State law governing public safety pensions says an officer shall file an application for a disability pension within 1 year after the date the member ceases to be an employee.
Mesa City officials claimed that the process was held in abeyance, while Mr. Brailsford stood trial and that his application for disability retirement came within a year after his acquittal. Problem with that is, more than 2 years had passed since Mr. Brailsford's termination, so he would not have qualified without the special agreement to be rehired.
Brailsford pleaded his case to the local pension board on the basis of PTSD. And guess who sits on that 5-member board? City Manager Chris Brady.
He had PTSD claim prior to his termination, so in fairness, he was given the opportunity to make that appeal to the board. So whatever the mechanism took place, but prior to his termination, his claim was that he had he was suffering from PTSD.
PTSD from the incident where he shot an unarmed man.
I don't remember the record of that. You'll have to go back and check.
You don't remember what his PTSD came from?
Okay, I've got to get
We
upstairs.
have to start.
Thanks.
We're already 15 minutes late.
Brailsford's attorney confirms the PTSD stemmed from the Shaver shooting itself and the murder case afterwards.
The local 5-member Public Safety Personnel Retirement System Board voted to grant Mr. Brailsford an accidental disability pension due due to his PTSD claim, which stemmed from the shooting incident and criminal prosecution. Despite being fired for violating Mesa police policies, Philip Mitch Brailsford is now considered to be medically retired. In other words, Philip Brailsford, at the age of 28 years old, is receiving a $2,500 tax-free check every month for the rest of his life. In November of 2022, the city of Mesa reached an $8 million settlement with Laney Sweet, the widow of Daniel Shaver, and his 2 children. Terms to the settlement included the dismissal of all claims with prejudice, meaning Laney Sweet would be barred from filing the same lawsuit against the city again.
To me, it does equate to some level of accountability and justice.
The money is for 2 daughters who have to grow up without dad. But Sweet says the message it sends is for other families to not give up on justice.
This is the highest verdict for a deceased victim in the state of Arizona. So that sets the bar, in Arizona higher up for future victims. Because unfortunately, as much as I wish police would stop killing people, it's going to continue to happen.